Testing, testing. This is Stefano Virgili from VOX podcast. And today we have a nature episode because we have Diane Ha in Kenya with our guest Jason in the middle of the office, I guess. That's your office, right?
Yes, with some chickens in the background and dog and whatnot. But yes, I mean, it's nice and refreshing to be out in the nature. So really quickly to do an intro, this is Jason Eisen. He is the founder of UTU, and you can check them out at utu.io. And really, I guess I'm just going to describe really briefly, and then he can jump into the long explanation that they are setting up and building a trust infrastructure. And then one more thing to add before I pass the floor to him is how we met. Actually, this is the first time we are meeting in person, but I heard about him through a friend of ours, a common friend, who watched one of the podcasts and actually thought, you know what, Utu actually would be super relevant to partner with, that whoever we were speaking with. But actually, why I want to bring that up is because it's super flexible in terms of application. So I'm going to stop there and pass over to Jason to speak a bit about what is Utu? Tell us about it.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about Utu. So we are really obsessed with trust, I guess is the easiest way to say it. And so I explain this a lot, and the easiest way I ever find to explain it is with a really simple question to start. I always ask this: who do you trust? You can answer. Everybody, you guys can answer.
Nobody in Kenya.
Nobody in Kenya.
My friends, my family.
Your family? Yeah. It turns out, so I've asked that question like, I don't know, a couple thousand times probably at this point, and everybody in the world answers the same way. I trust myself, I trust my family, and I trust my friends. Okay, well, some of my friends, sometimes for some things, right?
Yeah.
But essentially it comes down to we trust people based on who we know and our relationships. So it got us to thinking about, well, if everybody in the world trusts based on who we know, why is it that the digital mechanisms of trust, or the trust infrastructure of the internet, has absolutely nothing in common with how people trust in real life? Right? On the internet, you're asked to trust something like 5 random people that you've never met, that you have nothing in common with, that you probably don't share their values, their beliefs, their preferences.
Yeah.
Then, by the way, they may not even be a real person. It could be a paid review or a bot. But according to those 5 people, this babysitter has 5 stars on the babysitter app, and you should just go ahead and leave your 4-year-old with that person. And we thought that was a little bit crazy. And we said, well, is it possible to reimagine that experience from a human perspective and say, what would it actually look like if digital trust was built around the concepts of human trust? And we reimagined that same babysitter experience where you're going to the babysitter app and you need a sitter, and you find one sitter that has 50 good reviews, 5 stars from 50 random people, and 1 1-star review from your sister.
Right.
What do you do?
Right. Definitely.
Do you hire her or him or not?
Trust my sister.
Most people say they follow their sister.
Yeah.
So we asked, well, what if it was 500 good reviews and 1 bad one from your sister?
Oh,
People
still trust my sister.
Yeah, people still say they go with their sister, their friend, their brother, whatever. And so we said, well, why is every company, every platform, every marketplace bending over backwards to show us this overwhelming number of aggregated, averaged, and anonymous validations about a service or a service provider, when actually one validation from the right person about the right feature at the right place at the right time is way more powerful than any number of anonymous aggregated validations. And so we set out to build that, essentially to bridge the gap between how we trust in the real world and how we trust online.
Is what they, in the PR strategy, when they were segmenting the target audience, talking about the 90s, probably through the beginning of this century, they had this concept of the smart friend. Say before the internet became a thing, there was the smart friend that you call up when you need something, right? You need to buy a new car. There is one friend that you trust, and all the others, you just don't trust them. And it's very interesting. Also, allow me to chip in some material for conversation. I found very interesting in Southeast Asia, this part of the world where I live. I buy a lot of products online, and the largest majority of the reviews that I find on the marketplace are pertaining the delivery. They don't talk about the products, which I find it infuriating, because I want to buy that product. I want to know if the product is good. And then I go through all the reviews. It's like, they deliver it super fast. I haven't tried the product yet. It came within 2 hours, but I haven't tried the product yet. Whereas when you go on the other side, in the Western world, you'll find a lot of reviews about the products that are so incredibly detailed that make me wonder whether they are genuine or if they is an insider job. And when they are too negative, is also an external job of a competitor that is trying to demolish the reputation of that product or service. So tell me how you solve the problem.
Yeah, I think what you've just gotten at are two of the fundamental flaws that we see in kind of the trust infrastructure of the internet. So one is that right now it's perceived to be pretty ubiquitous and universal about how we perceive trust. We think about highest rating, not best fit. We ignore this idea of context, the importance of context. Like you say, maybe you have that one friend that you trust to buy a car, but it's not the same person that you'd ask for advice about a babysitter or a restaurant or any number of other services. And so there's a tremendous amount of context, but now some of it's about closeness to us and some of it's about the specific similarity for that use case. So we may trust our brother or our sister very strongly in general, but they may be a weak recommender for some other particular service that we might want because they just have a different approach to it or they're not interested in it. And so that acceptance of context as a really key factor in mitigating trust or managing trust as one. And then the second piece is trust is currently a product on the internet. It is distributed to us as consumer-facing platforms, companies like TripAdvisor and Yelp. You can call these trust companies. And by making trust public facing, we are essentially saying trust is a product. And I disagree with that assertion. Trust is an infrastructure. It's a currency. It underlies the things that we do online, but we never go and seek specifically trust. You never go to the store to buy trust. You never go to a website to buy trust unless you're really going to TripAdvisor or Yelp. And then ultimately it's a service in the real world or online that you're trying to get. And so the idea of shifting trust as a B2B infrastructure service, the same way AWS became the infrastructure provider of the entire e-commerce and sharing economy and web infrastructure, PayPal for payments, Salesforce for CRM. If you look across the web, the only piece that companies, that platforms have to build every single startup over and over are these trust mechanisms. And they're usually done halfway or not at all as an afterthought, and they can actually be optimized a lot and provided as a service, just like some of these other things. So I think these two key bits of trust that you got to are two of our core problems with the current system.
That's interesting. You know, I was just watching a webinar on systems change, and this is a true example of a systems change initiative that you're working on. And that's why it cuts across so many different use cases. But that's right, that TripAdvisor has done it for traveling. Airbnb has it just for bookings, but like this should be across the board. Yeah. That can be used, you know, for any sort of service or product.
Yeah, and all that information, all that data is siloed, serving the companies when it should actually be provided horizontally, serving the end users, maintaining their privacy and serving them across use cases, across sectors, across platforms. Really what we have today is a legacy of what eBay gave us in the mid-90s when they introduced 5-star ratings, pseudonymous 5-star ratings, and open text review as, well, that's good enough if I'm just buying like a Beanie Baby on eBay. But now 25 years later, we hire mechanics, we hire like people to work for us, we hire people to come work in our home, we hire babysitters, we get information about sensitive topics, we do dating, there's a lot of things that we do online that a pseudonymous 5-star rating and some open text field is just not good enough. Coming back to these open platforms, again, when you make it open, it means if I can create one account, it means I can create 1,000 accounts. And so, yes, you can tout, well, we have algorithms that look for fraud and detect fraud, or you can systemically eliminate it by moving this to an infrastructure service. So this, there's a lot of paradigms that we want to shift about how we consume trust or how we think about digital trust.
That's wonderful. I mean, I think it's really novel in the way of how we think about trust in general. So yeah, brilliant. I love that we are talking right now.
Great.
So backtrack a little bit. UTU, it's it's a strange name. I know it has a Swahili influence.
Big domain.
Can you
utu.io, right?
Yeah, exactly. Can you tell us why you picked UTU?
Yeah, so Utu is actually the Swahili word for humanity. Like maybe the operating system Ubuntu, the open source system from South Africa. Ubuntu, this kind of the same word. It means humanity, or I am because we are, I am because you are, that we're all in this together. And this was really, really a perfect name for what we do. It hits the spot.
Yeah.
This idea that we're all in this together. And then the idea of using a Swahili word. We're based in Kenya. Our company was born in Kenya, and it's hard to imagine that probably we could have been born with the ideas that we have and doing them the way that we do them if we had probably been born anywhere else. And so actually we've been asked to move on different occasions to other places, and we've always said that, no, Kenya is really our home. This is the market that inspired what we do, and which next innovation do we miss when we go to some cushy, global startup hub? And I think Kenya honestly has enough going on here and enough to keep us here that we have no reason to leave.
Yeah, interesting. So what is with any type of initiative that involves like changing the entire way of doing something, you must have had some challenges or some, what has been the market reaction so far?
Yeah, it's certainly been so. I think we were ahead of the curve when we started thinking about this. We actually didn't start out to build Utu when we first started. I can tell that story in a minute, maybe. But I think it's interesting because these things that we started thinking about, you could say back in 2013, which is really when we started working on this in some capacity. We were some of the only people probably talking about this stuff, about digital trust, about privacy by design. And I think the world has caught up in the meantime, and we happen to be in a nice position where our tech is maturing just as the world is realizing how critical this is and how big a gap this is in how we implement tech. I think one of the things COVID has done is illustrate this point more than anything. Even look at some of the contact tracing solutions that are being rolled out around the world and the abhorrent flaws that they have when it comes to privacy preservation. And we have to accept that these technologies are not going away, and they're not benign. They're going to be used, they're going to be repurposed, and if they're not carefully conceived and implemented, they're also going to be hacked by malicious third-party actors. And we're talking about heisting the world's data here. So we've come up with some thoughts on this, but certainly it's been a challenge to communicate about trust, especially in written form. We're way better when we can talk to people like this and tell our story about why we are so obsessed with trust, which maybe is a good segue into how we got into trust. I don't know.
But wait, before that, though, did you ever get any because when something is so different and so out there, especially when you were talking about this 7 years ago or less, did you get any angry people, because change is just, people don't like change in general.
I don't think we've ever had anyone angry with us, at least not that I know of. We've certainly had a lot of people that don't believe us, we've had people say that they don't really think trust is a problem in the early days, and they don't believe that what we're solving is really an issue. We don't really hear that very much anymore. We've had a lot of people think that that was really interesting, but that, wow, a paradigm shift, that's really a big lift. And I think there's a lot of people that have this idea that the next world-changing tech is not going to come from Kenya or something like this, that if you're a Kenyan startup, you're solving Kenyan problems, or you're only solving Africa problems. And I just don't think that's the case. I think more and more we're seeing startups everywhere that are addressing global problems. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that we've faced, or people have thought about us over the time, that this is only an Africa problem, or this is only an Africa company. And we've worked hard to prove that otherwise. And I think the market has also proven that trust is an issue everywhere.
Yeah, that it's like ready for it. So want to ask, I guess you can decide where should we start. Should we, because you mentioned briefly that you didn't start out this way, whether we start talking about what UTU is now, or like start from the journey, up to you. Like,
yeah, let me tell the story of how it started, because it makes sense in that context of why we do what we do, I guess. So I'm a recovering consultant. I used to work for a consulting firm based in DC that was doing a lot of work with big donors like USAID. And I started coming to East Africa for that work in 2010, and spending a lot of time in the region, and becoming increasingly fascinated with the Kenyan startup scene and some of the amazing companies that were coming here. At the same time, every time I was here, I had every conceivable problem that you can imagine with taxis, and probably 2 or 3 problems that you can't imagine. Yeah.
So we had someone talk on the show actually, and it was Adam from Link, who talked about like getting a taxi here. So I think, you know, our audience will know the basic issues.
Okay.
What are these not uncommon issues, I guess?
Well, I won't say I hope it's uncommon, but definitely the weirdest thing I ever had happen in a taxi was the driver tried to involve us in a arms deal in Somalia. Yeah, and I was at the time when I was working on this USAID contract, so it was not really appropriate at all. Not that would be appropriate in another context. But,
wow.
No, anyway, so we had I had some interesting experiences, and we were having a small party before my colleagues and I were going back to Washington after one trip. This was November 2012, and we're maybe 10, 15 people all sitting around, and we got to sharing horror stories about taxis. And everybody had these awful stories. And then that night I got on a plane, flew back to DC, and the day I landed, I took something like 7 different types of tech-powered transport all in that day. I took an Uber, a Car2Go, a bike share, the Metro app, the bus app, Waze for traffic. And that night I was sitting at home, and I thought, oh my gosh, I used 7 of these things in one day. And 2 years ago, not one of these things even existed. And I couldn't stop thinking about that, and about all the challenges we had with tech here, or with transport here, and this growing startup ecosystem, all these cool companies, and couldn't stop. 2 months later, I quit my job and moved to Kenya to start, at the time, the first taxi app anywhere on the continent. So that was what became Maramoja. And Maramoja, essentially, we started thinking, okay, yeah, we're basically just going to build Uber for Africa before they do. And we realized pretty quickly that this was the wrong idea, and we were going to build the wrong thing. We started talking to people all over the city, and we asked the same question. Hey, this is the prototype. Do you want to use our app? I said, why would I use your app? I have my guy. What do you mean your guy, right?
Yeah.
Oh, anytime I need a ride, I call Benson. He's always there for me.
Yeah, he'll take an hour to come, but you know, it's my guy. Like
my guy.
There's no need for change. Like, even though you are expressing something that's more, you know, immediate and more,
So then people say, well, what about if your guy doesn't answer the phone? Oh, well, then I call my sister and she sends me her guy. Oh, okay. Well, what about if he's busy? Oh, well, then he sends me his guy, and anyone that he sends me, I'll trust. Okay. So we heard that literally a couple hundred times, and we thought, maybe there's a idea here. And we said, well, what would it actually look like if you reconceptualized a taxi app from the ground up for a place like Nairobi that was built around trust? And we realized that Uber and every other taxi app that had been built at the time was making an assumption in the fundamentals of their business model that was not true here. They were assuming that a taxi is a commodity, that you don't care one or the other, You just want the closest and the fastest, and that's the end of it. And that's probably true in California, New York, and London, where most of those apps were built. But at the time, that wasn't true, and it's still not true in Kenya. And looks like more of the world resembles Kenya than resembles California.
In
And
Uganda,
so
I
we
found
went with
exactly
this
the same
idea.
situation. In Uganda, I found the same exact situation. I have my
Sure.
regular guy for a motorbike and my regular guy for driving, and buys regular guy when the first regular guy is not available, right?
Precisely.
Well,
Yeah.
even in Malaysia, I think when Grab or Uber first came, also people were like, I don't know this guy. I mean, how do I know it's safe? You know, so there was this issue as well. Go on.
Yeah. No, so we said, well, what would that look like if we tried to build this socially powered or trust powered taxi app? And we realized we could actually combine the best of both worlds, this idea of working with drivers that you personally know and trust, giving the user a choice about which driver he goes with or she goes with, and at the same time giving the same convenience of an app and the scalability of an app. And so we set about building it, and we got tremendous results from integration of this trust engine, as we started to call it, into this taxi app, thinking about how do we optimize for trust. We went really far down this road thinking about trust in its most esoteric and abstract forms, and thinking how does that manifest in a digital app, and all just to get a good taxi recommendation. And we probably went overboard on this, but it paid off, and it helped our metrics, it helped build the brand, it helped build us despite being tremendously undercapitalized comparing to Uber and the others, taxi app that can compete across Africa, and it's competing on the basis of better trust. And that's a really interesting value proposition that I don't think people had explored before. And what it led to for us was a lot of opportunity of people coming from all parts of the world and from all sectors saying, hey, we read about this trust thing that you have in your taxi app, and we run a taxi app. We need that trust thing too. Or we run an app for doctors, we run an app for housekeepers, for mechanics, for babysitters, for you name it, for dating, for fake news, for contact tracing. And the number of expressions of what we have built and what we are continuing to build is as varied as the number of types of transactions that people do on the web.
Wow, that's brilliant.
So that's kind of the whole history and then the vision.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, you started with, okay, we're trying to solve this problem. Let's build trust around this one thing. And then you start to see more and more applications for it. And you're like, why limit it to, like the Airbnb or TripAdvisor kind of, model?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we had this vision pretty soon after that of what we ended up calling horizontal trust infrastructure for the whole internet, right? Replacing anonymous scores and ratings and badges with something more personal and more human.
Stefano, do you have questions?
Yes, that's why you say trust as a service, or how do you define the business that you are distributing?
Yeah, we call it trust infrastructure as a service. Again, referencing kind of all of the other B2B infrastructure services that used to be built in-house by every platform. And over time, as those needs have matured and those systems become more complex, have moved to centralized service providers of them. The same way, like the same business model that Google Maps used for ages, of a certain number of queries a month for free, and then after that you pay based on the number of queries. It lets small companies basically pay based on their consumption, have some free time that they can build on that infrastructure and grow, and then pay based on their consumption as they grow. And so that's the model that we've taken. It's the investment we've made in the intelligence in the back end, as well as in the data pool that we're able to pull from. This is something that very few startups or even some big companies can be able to build on their own. Much easier to integrate this.
So how does a company start working with UTU? They get to your website and they ask for a demo, or they can sign up immediately, or they need to have a tech team to develop APIs? How does it work? How easy is to get started?
Yeah, so right now we have a little bit of a waiting list to get a deployment. Depends on the sector that the company's in and how much customization that they need. We do customize the API and the engine for each client as much as we need to and as much as they want. We have a core engine that people can plug into. It's already running in a couple sectors. It's running in the mobility sector. It's running in the financial services and fintech sector, supporting lending use cases. It's about to go live in the online teleworking sector, like freelancing platform.
Oh, okay.
So there's quite a number of use cases that we've already built out, and there's more use cases that we're building out kind of as we go. I think the best way for companies to get started with us is just to reach out, to shoot me an email, and happy to talk. Every company's issues are a little bit different. Generally, they fall into the same basket, some general large baskets. But I think the end point that for us is that trust is highly dynamic, and a one-size-fits-all model is not right. So we work really hard to understand each company, each client's specific needs around trust.
That's very interesting. Although you are referring to a comparable business model, which is the one of, let's say, Google integration. Like if you want to make a Google Maps call, for example, it's pretty much easy to set up on your own just by getting the documentation from Google's website and specification. Are you planning to move to that direction where you have
for sure.
a premium client that you have to do the tailor-made customization, but you also have your pret-a-porter collection where you can just go to the website and get the first basic service available online for anyone?
Yeah, that's the goal for sure. Our dream is certainly something along the lines of like a PayPal one-touch integration, right? That's really where we're trying to head. One thing I say often is that for us to become sector agnostic, which is our goal, we have to become sector specialists across the board. And it's then that we can build out and offer that type of seamless integration. That's where we're moving towards. We expect to be there end of 2020, early 2021.
Wow. Okay, that's fast to be like across a few different sectors. Okay.
Nothing to wait for.
Yeah, I mean, we're all sitting around for COVID, right? Might as well work. Okay. Wait. So, walk us through. Like, okay, you mentioned some of the examples. Maybe mobility, or I imagine that's where you probably have the most maturity.
Yeah.
So
that's where we started.
So with a client there who's, client meaning a business who's running, something related to like maybe a taxi, Uber type service, and they are like, I want to incorporate trust into my business so that my users can see this. So they have your product integrated with theirs. And just walk us through a bit, like how much they are paying as a business, and then what the users would see.
Yeah. So the users would see something, basically we integrate at two key points in a client's app, essentially at the recommendations and at the feedback mechanism, right? If you think about, those are the two places where trust is the core feature, the core element that we're talking about. So we're providing a socially powered recommendation, and we don't believe in prescriptive trust, only descriptive trust. What do I mean by that is we'll never turn somebody into a number. We'll not say that this is like a 76.3 trustable person with a confidence interval of 80%. This is pretty meaningless to people. This is not how we think about trust in the real world. So we'll give a list of descriptive factors and reasons that speak directly to the user. Something like in the case of a taxi, maybe we'll say, 5 of your friends, including Susan, Sarah, Paul, and Mary, have used this driver 56 times in the last 3 weeks, giving him badges for safe driving, cleanliness, and cool music. And they recorded this video testimonial speaking about their experience with them. And we can serve you up the video of your friend actually talking about her ride with that driver. A lot more interesting than this driver has X number of 5-star ratings or an aggregate rating of this.
Okay.
So that's one
Makes
piece
sense.
that you're interacting
So
with.
specifically on the attributes that are relevant and then numbers related to that.
Yeah,
Okay,
and the
makes sense.
features, the people that from whom it's meaningful for
Right.
you to hear about, because maybe you know that this person prefers the same type of driver that you prefer. So my taxi drivers, I like a guy that plays cool music and drives pretty fast, and maybe he lets me smoke cigarettes in his car, and that's a 5-star driver for me. For a lot of other people, that's a 1-star driver. And so understanding what is actually driving, what are the individual features that are driving it, and who are the people that share your set of optimal features from within your network, that you have some contextual knowledge. Yes, this person's like me in these ways. I probably will follow their recommendations. I'm more likely. And in fact, what we've learned is that all of the data seems to confirm this, that the closer people are in a social graph, the more similarity that there is in their rating behavior and their feedback and their observance, or kind of their perception of a service.
Okay, so this infrastructure collects things about, let's say I'm a user, collects the attributes that I care about, so it knows this about me, and also the people that I know, and maybe the levels of trust I have with the people, or closeness with the people as well? Or?
Yeah, to some, I can't say it collects it. It tries to understand it through all the different data points that it does collect.
Okay.
And I want to make it clear here, because at this point becomes pretty obvious that our service is super data hungry.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we thought about in the beginning of building such a data hungry service is that you can't build that in the same way it might have been built some years back, where the business is about collecting and owning people's data, which is distinctly what our business is not about. In most ways, our business is actually about taking all of the data that companies have are collecting, and putting it back into the user's control and making it work for them. And so this is part of why some of the blockchain stuff that we're building, that maybe we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
But the other piece that you would then interact with in the from UTU on any given marketplace or platform are the feedback mechanisms, right? So like I mentioned, instead of giving some narrative review that you have to thumb out, we're not using keyboards on laptops, we're on our phone. So instead of typing out a review, hold it up in front of your face and record a selfie video describing the service, right? It's a richer content that's going to be more benefit to the people who see it. In past times, you probably didn't care who saw it, but now you know it's probably only your friends and family that are going to see that. So you have an incentive to give the best information possible. But then also breaking down that feedback mechanism into badges and other forms of measuring the different aspects of trust.
It's very interesting. You're describing something that is like a slap on the face of the traditional data-driven business model, because we basically go back to the point that at any time in our life when we went for a communication course, they will teach us that 90% of what we say is about the way we say it and not what we say. And so it's the same logic in a review, for example. You remove all the personality out of a message, and you bring it back. I mean, the eBay business model was the one that removed the personality out of a review. And I rather listen to someone explaining what they feel about it rather than read it, because in the text I lack the subtext in a way, or I'm unable to. And also there are some friends that can tell me the same exact thing, and I trust one and I don't trust the other, right? It's bias. It's not unbiased. Whereas data is totally unbiased. And if it fails to recognize that we take decisions sometimes, like what were you mentioning at the beginning about the system? We take decisions sometimes that are based on our bias. For instance, when you say 500 people say there is a good babysitter and your sister says a bad babysitter, you can also say, yeah, my sister is very picky. No, it depends, really. It doesn't have to be number driven, or it could be number driven. It really depends. How many investors have trusted this vision and decided to fuel your business?
Oh, we've got quite a list of investors that we've put together. Some pretty impressive names, I guess. We've been able to attract. We've been super fortunate. We've been able to attract investment from SoftBank Group's Deep Core Investments. Actually, the first investment that they've made in Africa is quite exciting. They're a huge force, obviously, in AI. When they move, the whole world moves, I guess. We've been pretty excited to have them as a partner for the last year and a half now, as well as Zeroth AI based out of Hong Kong, and Eternity Ventures based in Europe, as well as some more recent investors like Keppel Africa Ventures, incredible Japanese VC operating around Africa, a number of angels and true believers that have stood by us and supported us. It's been interesting because fundraising for a business like this, as you can imagine, that's not such a straightforward, like this is a marketplace for X, or it's a bit more challenging, and we've had to look pretty far and wide to find those people around the world that see our vision. And what's been interesting is that we have been able to put together this group of investors from multiple countries, from Japan, from Australia, from a couple countries in Europe, from Hong Kong, from the US, from around Africa, that I think validate the global nature of this vision.
That's brilliant that you have so many names and so much support. I mean, I guess that's encouraging, because on one hand, I feel like, I don't know if people would get it or want to put their money to it. They might say, yeah, it's a nice idea, but so hearing this is really inspiring for other tech startups around here as well, that and maybe that you have an amazing fundraising skill as well.
I don't know about that. We have a pretty incredible team. I think that's what people have bought into. So our CTO, my co-founder, Dr. Bastian, as he's known around the office, is one of the smartest guys you'll ever meet. And I think under his leadership, basically, we've been able to attract probably the best and brightest in AI on the continent. So like our head of data science is a nuclear physicist trained in the US, with a PhD in nuclear physics, and was working on particle accelerator data, some of these huge data sets. And then our head of AI is an absolutely brilliant autodidact that is kind of an IP generating machine. So we have a pretty cool team, and I think that team, along with a tremendous passion that we all share, because I think that's probably the thing that defines us as a group, is that we're all reasonably obsessed with what we do and wouldn't probably be doing anything else. Those two things can go a long way.
Let us address the elephant in the room. I heard the word blockchain, and I have very mixed feelings about blockchain. Tell me everything about blockchain integration with UTU, and I might have 25 more questions about it.
That's what I want to ask as well. Yes, let's jump into it now.
Okay, tell you everything about blockchain, or tell you everything that you need to know about blockchain? Because if it's everything that you need to know about blockchain, I would tell you that, well, there's a blockchain involved. If it's everything about blockchain, I'll defer you to my CTO, Dr. Bastian, who will give you a long technical answer that will be extremely articulate. And with
we need to dumb this down, by the way.
Yeah, so I'll give you the Jason. They call me sometimes the chief talking officer of the company. I'll give you the chief talking officer answer about why blockchain and what it is. So Dr. Bastian, he did his PhD some years back at the intersection of privacy preservation mechanisms and distributed systems and what's called trust-based negotiation code protocols and coalition formation in multi-agent systems. Keep in mind, that's the layman's explanation.
I don't know what you said.
How do you optimize for trust in a game theoretical environment where people all have their own agendas? There's not universal 100% trust, where people can break their word or act in a different way. How do you optimize for trust in a system like that? And the blockchain that we are ending up building was a product of essentially the accelerator that we went to in Hong Kong, Zeroth AI. And some of the folks there were leading the charge into blockchain at the time. And we explored this with them and realized that actually, if we thought about trust as a public good that currently has perverse economic incentives attached to it, we can actually open up space to think about how this solution plays in. What do I mean? So what are the economic incentives right now around trust? So essentially, if I'm a seller on a platform, I can go buy 10,000 fake reviews for, I don't know, $50,000. And guess what? My product starts selling. And the guy who sold me those reviews from the review farm is happy. I'm happy as there's review farms. Houses full of smartphones being auto-clicked and things like this. There are review farms. Absolutely. It's a multi-$100 million industry, the black market for reputation and reviews. So all of this is happening. And sorry, I've lost my train of thought. So we looked at these economic incentives that are accruing around trust are for building trust or facilitating good outcomes, which essentially, if we think about what's the end result of trust, it's that a client gets the right service that they need, a service provider gets good clients. So it's a mutually beneficial outcome. It's a bit of a public good, but there are bad actors that spoil that for all of us. And so we thought about the blockchain as a mechanism to tokenize trust, and also as a mechanism to give that control over the data back to people, and let them control what gets shared, how it gets shared, and who it gets shared with, and under what circumstances. So without getting into the technical and just thinking about the conceptual and the reason behind it, it's really about control for users, and it's about providing economic incentives around trust for the right actions.
Stefano, did you have 25 follow-ups?
But I'm very curious. So basically, you say you have a token. Is that correct? And the token is traded. And it's traded on an exchange.
So we're actually working on a 2-token ecosystem. There's not a token that's live right now, but essentially the model is that we wanted to disaggregate the concepts of money and trust to some extent. You can think about it as get money out of trust, and you can interpret that 2 ways. On the front end, we wanted to eliminate the ability of people to buy trust, right? You shouldn't be able to buy tokens and thereby, by having a lot of tokens, somehow be trustworthy. So the only way to get the main token, the utility token of our system, is to participate in the system, to be an actor within it that shares data into the protocol, privacy being preserved in the meantime, and provides valuable information and feedback that actually benefits other users, which actually earns you more of those tokens as you help other users get good outcomes. On the same token, we wanted people to be able to profit from creating those good outcomes for people. And so there is a second token that's free, that will be freely tradable. And the first one can basically convert into the freely tradable one, but not the other direction. So you can earn money from building trust, but you can't buy trust.
Yeah, I've always believed into the 2-token system being a better solution than 1 token only. However, it comes.
The challenge is around complexity, trying to keep it simple enough that people can use it and interact with it without feeling like they need a PhD in game theory.
Yeah, and always the same old challenge of onboarding and outboarding, getting in and out the system. One question I wanted to ask: are you familiar with Moneta? It was one of, at the time, was the 8th most successful ICO in the world. It was 2016, I think. Moneta, does it ring any bell?
I've heard of it. I can't say I know much about it or could speak on it.
It was. I attended a presentation. I was invited as a guest speaker. It was presented in Singapore, although it's been created in Europe. But it was a similar concept, and again, was 1 token one token only. Actually, they raised $20 million through an ICO, if I recall correctly. The idea was to build up a system very close to what you had described, which is basically promoting the transparency. Now, the question that I have when it comes to integrating blockchain is, do I really need to use blockchain for all this? Can't I just use a normal database infrastructure to simply store my friend that in a video tells me, go with the driver, is a good guy, or take that babysitter, is a good person? Where is the essential of blockchain, and where is the, where is the necessity, and where is just the accent that you want to give on top of your technology?
Yeah, I think the ability for UTU as a forward-looking vision for UTU to be able to run to some extent like a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, where you have some smart contracts that are enforcing the rules of this protocol, and essentially it makes it trustable by everybody that's involved. I think by using a blockchain, you can circumvent the current data privacy issues that every single company is facing. And you say, you know, we're not even going to get into this. We are embracing privacy by design and not asking you to trust us that what we're doing is what we're saying we're doing, and that there's nothing else happening. With a smart contract open system, there's full transparency for anybody that wants to see this. My CTO would probably give you a laundry list of other technical answers around the privacy preservation, around the data storage, around
this I understand. I mean, this makes
Which blockchain are you using?
Eternity. There's no other blockchain I think that we would probably have built this on.
I lost you for a second. Can you repeat it?
Eternity. AETERNITY. One of the really incredible chains out of Europe. I think their tech is leaps and bounds ahead of most other chains. What they're doing with state channels, what they're doing with usability features to make interacting with a blockchain a lot more simple and straightforward, sort of like interacting with the web. For instance, like they introduced a DNS protocol, right, for naming domains. So instead of having a 26-digit alphanumeric address, you can claim Jason Eisen or UTU, right? So it just makes there's a lot of things that they've done to make this tech more usable and more scalable. And again, if you want the deep answer, we'll refer you to the technical discussion to be hosted on a future episode with Dr. Bastian.
Stefano, just checking to see if you have more follow-ups. I do have questions, but they are outside of the blockchain and tech
I think we are approaching now 40 minutes, and we have taken so much, actually more than 40 minutes. We have taken so much of Jason's time. I think you can shoot your favorite questions towards the end and let him wrap it up and tell us what would be the ideal scenario for our audience to be engaged with UTU. But first, your question, Diane, please.
Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna be cheeky and combine a few.
Okay.
Two questions I want to ask. One is, you know, and this is more future, well, sort of current and future. First, I want to know, like, you know, how COVID has affected your business. And then secondly, what industries are you looking to get into that you haven't gotten into yet?
Let me tackle the second one first, because it's a little bit shorter, I would say. Like I said, we're already working in mobility and in fintech and in remote professional services, gig economy stuff. We think about trust as being a corollary to risk. And so we think about the areas where people experience and feel the most risk. Their home, their health, their family, their business, and their assets, those 5 areas. So if there's a transaction that's exposing one of those 5 things to any sort of risk, right? Physical risk, health risk, financial risk, reputational risk, emotional risk, these are transactions that we can help bring a lot more trust and better outcomes for every party involved.
Yeah.
In terms of COVID, it's been a journey, I could say. Certainly it's provided some interesting opportunities for us, but it's also brought some huge challenges. We were in the middle of raising a round when COVID hit, and had some of our lead investor affected and some of our follow-on investors affected. And so we've had to restructure the round for sure. And we're now raising a smaller amount at a reduced valuation, but we're pretty confident that we're going to bring that out.
And this is what you were saying also, where like a face-to-face kind of meeting actually makes more sense in talking about the business.
Yeah,
rather
it's really
than
tough, right?
read this white paper. And
yeah. Guys don't really want to read 20, 30-page white papers. They want to understand in a face-to-face, who are you and what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
But we've made pretty good progress nonetheless. And then it's also come up with some interesting tech for us to deliver and opportunities for us to contribute, I guess, our core areas of expertise into the national and global response. So there's a couple things at the taxi app level. We've started working with some partners to do grocery delivery, turning our network of taxis into grocery delivery. We're also starting to work on an ambulance service that would convert some of our, not with Flair, but we are working with Flair on some other stuff. They've been amazing partners, and we actually hope to work with them on this as well. It's not a done deal yet, but we're working on things around this. We're working on some interesting offering around Africa. We're actually taking our mobility app to market through franchises, not directly. And so we're coming up with some offers to be able to spin up delivery franchises for entrepreneurs around the continent with a lot fewer barriers to getting that started.
Interesting.
Then we've typically had some like big upfront cash requirements that we've required from franchises. And given the current circumstances, we're thinking about trying to make a massive offer to reduce that barrier and hopefully get as many delivery franchises and taxi franchises spun up.
Wait, sorry. So when you say franchises, you mean like I have a like taxi app somewhere else, and I want to, or delivery, I want to have a delivery.
No, you're an entrepreneur anywhere, you're a business person anywhere, and you want to bring a mobility app, a delivery app, or a taxi app to your market, but don't really have the ability to build it, the time to build it, the know-how to build it. So we've expanded essentially that way through giving that opportunity to entrepreneurs to deploy our tech in their market as sort of a franchise relationship. And it's been super successful in being able to scale.
With the token piece in there,
with the trust piece already baked in, exactly. And if you think about what that does to not to get too deep, but the unit economics of the mobility business become transformed when you separate the product cost from the go-to-market cost. And then you decentralize the go-to-market investment. Suddenly it's not the top 15 cities on the continent that can have taxi apps, which is as far as any of those big companies have gone. It's the top 500 cities on the continent. And when we're talking about Africa, keep in mind the top 15 cities, like 6% of the population. The top 500 cities are 65% of the population. So that's the second bit. And then one final COVID response, the thing that we're actually the two bits that we're most excited about is we've started working on integrating our trust infrastructure for better trust in the information and self-reporting about COVID, working with a large disaster management platform. And then we're also working on a privacy preserving, decentralized contact tracing solution. So we're actually talking to a couple African governments about implementing it. The idea being that now is a time of emergency, and it should not be the moment where malicious actors have an opportunity to basically heist the continent's data at large scale. And so we devised a system, mostly Dr. Bastian devised the system, basically finding the shortfalls and the privacy flaws in all of these other models, the MIT model, the Apple Google model, PPET, Australia, Singapore. They all have flaws in privacy that we're trying to close. So we're doing a lot on COVID.
Wow, it's so fascinating, like how broad the applications, you know, the use cases are. I just wish we have another like 3 hours to talk. But Stefano, over to you.
Yes, Jason, we have taken so much of your time. What would you like to say to our audience, and ideally, who would you like to talk to in our audience? Who will be your ideal stakeholder at the moment? Is from the investment side? I understand that you are actually in the midst of fundraising and you're targeting $1 million. And also, I guess, from partnership sides or clients, your last
Yeah, I could say that anyone who's interested in the field of trust, I'm very happy to speak to. So whether it's an investor or a partner or a platform or a startup that's just trying to understand how they think about trust or how they should think about trust, or a researcher, we have some R&D partnerships as well. Generally speaking, if you're interested in the future of trust, I'd be very happy to talk to you. The last thing I'll say is, I guess, please come join us on our journey of bridging that gap between real world and digital trust. And thank you guys for this really cool opportunity. It was really fun.
Thank
and
you
the chickens
much.
didn't make noise once.
No, the chickens, we're happy. We're happy. Wow,
thank you for being with us.
Yeah,
so just to remind the audience, the website is utu.io. Is that correct?
utu.io. That's right. And you can check out our taxi app as well. It's called Maramoja, maramoja.co.ke.
Yeah, it's pretty known here in Kenya. All right, go change the world, Jason.
Thanks. This was super fun, guys. Keep up the great work.
Thank you for being with us.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.